My name is Noel Sharkey. I'm an emeritus professor of robotics and artificial intelligence and also public engagement at the University of Sheffield. I'm co-director of the Foundation for Responsible Robotics and chairman of the International Committee for Robot Arms Control. I began as a psychologist. I was very passionate about psychology since I was 19, and when I was a final year undergraduate, I took a course in artificial intelligence and was really caught by it. I could say I was suckered into it because I believed all of the hype. I read a book by Maggie Bowden, who's a friend now, a very famous AI woman, called Artificial Intelligence and Natural Man, and it really caught me completely. And so when I started my PhD, I ended up taking an artificial intelligence model from artificial intelligence from the Yale School, script theory, Roger Schank and Bob Abelson, and I adapted that into a psychological model and did some very detailed experimental work on word recognition to show the impact of knowledge of the world in our perceptions of words. So that's how I began. But at the time I also taught myself to program, and I was head of the Poetry Society, so the first thing I programmed was a poetry generator. So I had a little program that generated lots and lots of haiku, and I would take a little paper roll to parties and had thousands of haiku on it, and they were terrible, but it was a start. But then I got, when I finished my PhD, it was a very uncomfortable time because I had gone too far into AI. Psychologists didn't know what to do with it. And so when I applied for jobs, I was ignored. And I was just writing up my PhD. And I got a letter from Bob Abelson at Yale, and he said he was coming to England. Well, I talked to him, and he offered me a job at Yale without references or anything. He just had read a paper of mine and gave me a job in the AI labs. So then I really got into AI properly and learned it. But at the same time during my PhD, I also started getting heavily involved in this new area called neural computing. This was 1981. There was a book by Geoffrey Hinton just came out with the new world of neural computing. So I got into that and gradually developed my mathematics over the course of time. My next job was with my hero, Gordon Bauer, at Stanford, and I was brought there. He became an associate dean, so I was taken there to run his lab for him for 5-6 years. I only lasted a year because I came back to England. I loved it there, but I wanted a proper faculty job. This was temporary. So I had a chance then. I went to graduate maths classes, calculus and linear algebra, and developed my skills at that. But then I moved to language and linguistics in Sheffield, at Essex University, and I found that it was getting harder and harder to teach undergraduates because I was having to teach things like medieval phonetics, which I had to learn myself, from smart students. But then and they didn't understand mathematics at all. So I eventually then moved to Exeter University as a reader in computer science and bought some robots as I arrived, and so got into robotics. But the idea of getting into robotics, it was still from the same background. So my biggest interest was in how to process natural language by machine. That's what I really wanted to do. I think I was the first person to use neural networks for that, or at least one of the first. I had a paper in AAAI in 1986 on this. And so I'd read a book by Lakoff and Johnson and called Metaphors We Live By, which was saying essentially that language is vacuous in AI unless you work with things. So you learn language by putting things into things. So you get into a rage, but you only know that because you put things into cups. And so then I got a little scholarship and went to work in Lakoff's lab at Berkeley for a short period. Came back and bought a bunch of robots. And so started on robotics, but I get so caught up in the robotics I forgot all about the natural language. I got into machine learning and robotics at that point, and that drove me ever since. Machine learning, and I forgot all about the language stuff because I realized that robots couldn't. Machine understanding of languages is still pretty vacuous, and it got much worse. I was a very old-fashioned language person. I was interested in problems like the students went into, Mrs. Honess walked into her classroom and noticed that her pupils were noticeably dilated. So it was that kind of trick of language, how language is totally ambiguous, and how do you work that, how do you sort that out, how do you sort out those ambiguities? And the method that became common and is still prevalent today is non-pragmatic. I was into what's the point of this, what's the goal of this sentence, what's the purpose, what's the context, what's the meaning, and it all became about statistical methods, pulling out stuff out of millions of magazines and working out responses from that, which is entirely meaningless. And I don't think language has progressed as far as it would have done if they'd got some more of the old pragmatics in. And I know that a lot of the people working in statistical methods are now beginning to say that. Where's the old stuff? And they're reinventing it rather than going back and looking at all the work that was done. Yes, well, yes, I can do. There was a sandwich in between, which I suppose you should know about. But the work on robotics got into very large proportions in the end, because and this leads into what I'm doing now, because I was building these machine learning robots, and then I got a job on a popular TV program called Robot Wars as a judge, which I've done until last year, in fact. I've done every series of that throughout the world, including the US. And that led me into getting funding for bigger projects, in fact, because it was very popular. So I ended up getting, and I was an expert on another TV program called Techno Games, which is a robot Olympics, and I did that as well, where I had to, talk in between each game, so I'd have to talk about 20 times per program, and I had to learn everything. I had to learn how to learn things really quickly and be able to say things in 1 minute, minute and a half. So it was a really good media experience, and that was really crucial. And then I got contacted from a massive new museum, the Millennium Museum, which is out at Magna here in Rotherham and near Sheffield, and that's a third of a mile long. And they gave me a huge amount of money, bought me out of my job for 2 years, set me up with 5 postdocs and a lot of assistants and massive labs to build an exhibition which was a robot food chain, and a real one. So there were small robots evolved to find stage lights, and they had solar panels on top, and so they went. It had to be dramatic. That was the thing, and it had to be for my research. So they went under finding these light trees, and sat under them, getting their batteries charged. And then there was big ones called predators, that with flashing sort of LED-like eyes, and they had big tusks, and their algorithm was teaching them how to hunt the little ones. And we built them all ourselves, and the idea was that the big ones would pick up the little ones, stick a tusk into the centre of them, suck out a third of their battery power. So that's how they lived, as it were. And the big ones were, that was a lot harder than we thought. We ended up with the circuit board was 15 kilos, because there were so many capacitors to do this quick enough. At the time, this was in 2001, a massive job. So we started the research, but that was so heavily, people came there in droves to see that. So we had about 1 million visitors in the first 6 months, and the media was there all the time. And so we couldn't really get much research done, which was a real shame. But it was very big. And the other project we had was autonomous drones, and that's way back. That was before the CIA had them, 2001. And they were big balloons, big blimps, 14 feet long. And we had a third of a mile space, so we had 15 of them flocking up and down there autonomously. So it was really great fun, but again, it got into the media a lot. And the biggest breakthrough in the media was, and it's a lesson for anybody working in AI to learn, because I had a very good relationship with the media. And one of my robots, light sensing, left the workshop open. It drove out into the car park in the light. And And apparently a visitor nearly ran into it, and I just went and brought it back again. Came into work the next morning, and it was all over the world. A super intelligent robot in bid to escape. This was a simple system with light following, and that was a big learning experience. I had articles saying that I was an evil genius who was using the brains from man-eating eels to furnish my robots. And because they were sucking the electricity out, of course they were heading for the motorway to suck the electricity out of cars, and so it was a really good experience. But then from that, I was on so many TV programs explaining, taking the robots on. I was really worried to begin with because I've always been anti-hype. But I found it was a great opportunity to go out to the media and explain what this simple mechanism was and how it worked, So I had the robots on lots of chat shows and things. And then the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council stepped in and said they'd like to give me a fellowship, senior media fellowship. So I'd work in the media and explain to the public over the next 6 years what the reality of AI was and robotics, which was, at that time, people were showing up to see robot exhibitions. And somebody had their latest, and it was really, really good work, they had their latest obstacle avoidance algorithm. And people were saying, oh, is that all it can do? Because they were expecting some big sci-fi thing. So my job was to change that. And of course, one person couldn't possibly do that. But I had a good effort at it. And but during that time, so this brings me to what I do now. During that time, I started looking at what the hype that people were putting out, including my government, and did press conferences, one of which was with Alan Winfield, who I believe you'll have a tape of, and Owen Holland, another really good roboticist. And during that press conference, one of the press asked me about military robots. That was in 2006, 2007. And I knew nothing about it apart from being from Northern Ireland, and I knew about the wheelbarrow bomb disposal robot, but I knew nothing else. So that evening I thought, well, I'll just have a quick look at the internet and see so that I can answer questions next time. And that quick look took about 7 months and changed my life. And I got caught up. I wrote an article for our Guardian national newspaper, and that meant that I was invited to about 30 different militaries in the world, around the world, to talk about these autonomous weapon systems. Because what I discovered was that there were these weapons being built by the United States, or at least discussed by the United States. And as a roboticist, I just thought, this is science fiction, but these guys mean it. They're going to develop weapons that can't comply with the laws of war. Not that I knew what the laws of war was at this point. That was another whole study phase and learning human rights law, because I was so shocked by it, I couldn't stop. But once I get into it, because most of the people populating that area at the time on my side of the fence were philosophers. And once a tech guy goes in there was no way out again. It was my moral responsibility. It was very bad for my job at the time. It wasn't later, but it was at that time. But I just felt morally compelled. And then when I started going to lots and lots of conferences, then I met all the robot ethics people and moved that way. So now I deal generally completely with moral responsibility and robotics responsibility. So I'm chair of the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, which the very famous Ela, who's with you, beside you there, is involved in. And so I'm chair of that organisation, and we go to the UN about 3 weeks a year, and we're working really hard. We've got a really good campaign going, and we're talking there to about 90 nations and moving forward at iceberg pace. That's the way UN works. But we're getting there gradually and slowly. And then I co-direct the Foundation for Responsible Robotics, and we're based in The Hague, and we work on everything else except weapons. With both organisations, I work against looking at policing and privacy and surveillance, but particularly police use of weapons with the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, and police use of biased algorithms in the Foundation for Responsible Robotics. So we deal with everything, and our biggest project at the moment, and that's what I'm working hard. Well, we've got several big projects. One is on bias in algorithms, gender and race bias. We've done one on sex robots. And part of that was very impactful because part of it was about child sex robots. And after we published that report, the UK Police and Child Protection Agencies arranged a meeting immediately, and I'm now having meetings at the UK Parliament to try and get a new law, because they're not illegal in this country. They were not illegal in the United States either. So Senator Dan Donovan, a Republican congressman, also read our report, and his team contacted me and said, this was very interesting and we should do something about this. And I helped them, and they put the Creeper Act together, which has now gone through the House of Representatives. It doesn't make them illegal to possess, but they're illegal to buy or sell or import in the United States now. So that was one of our big projects, and it's still ongoing. And I found it very uncomfortable. I mean, again, I keep getting trapped in things.
Yeah.
That was just about one page of our report, and I'm locked into that now, and I'm just completing a very large-scale survey of paedophiles to show that these will have no therapeutic help, because there's the problem of, if it was going to help one child, then I couldn't really stop them being used for therapeutic purposes. So we're working with therapists as well. The other one is on environmental robots, so the use of robots to protect our environment. And there what we're doing is, there's been quite a lot of good work going on, and nobody's funding it, including at CMU. There's really good work monitoring the environment. Nobody's funding it. So what we're doing is we're putting together a big report and pushing governments, pushing the EU, etc., and saying, you need programs of funding for this. It's not all things to do with robotics is not about the economy of the country, which is what you hear all the time. Some things are for our protection, so it's a very good use. And we've done another report on how you could use drones well. Again, humanitarian uses. But our biggest thing to date, and it's growing very, very quickly, a lot of people are signing on, is we've been working with Deloitte, and we launched a project a month ago on a FRR, that's us, Foundation for Responsible Robotics, FRR certified quality mark. So we've got 6 criteria, including, we look at things like, are you gender biased? Are you using sustainable materials in your robot? We're doing AI as well. We're looking at, what have you thought about in the design, right down at the design level, to prevent this being used against someone's human rights? Will it take away autonomy? Will it ruin their privacy? So all those issues. And we're even going as far as to look at, will it be, what's it called, integrity, which is how you're treating your workers. So it's a 3-star system, but it's little robots called Q-bots. You get 3 Q-bots of your maximum, but otherwise you get 1 Q-bot, and you can get a pre-Q-bot. Because the idea is not to make a big thing of it. The idea is to try and encourage people. Incentivize. But to do it from design upwards, not just doing it from, oh look, let's put some ethics in, which is what companies like Google are doing, and all the big tech companies all get this idea, oh, let's set up an ethics board. And not tell anybody who they are, not tell anybody anything about them, and they're not allowed to identify themselves, so they might be fantasy people, and everything's already designed. So to get our certification, you're going to have to be showing that you're right down in there doing it. And we've already signed up a couple of companies. We're signing up 4 pilot companies. Deloitte are putting 5 departments on this. Auditing is what we're really after from them. They've got great skills in that. It looks like the WEF, World Economic Forum, is joining us as well. They want to work with this. Philips wants to work with this. So we're gathering very, very quickly on this, and that's going to be my work now probably till I die. I hope not. I'm a real science fiction fan.
Are you?
Yes, and I know I was a science fiction fan before I was 4 years old, because I used to listen to Dan Dare every evening on the radio, and that finished when I was 4 in 1952. So I was a science fiction fan most of my life, and I have to make a point of seeing I have to see robot movies, and I love the Terminator. I mean, despite what I'm working against war robots, because I mean I see it, and it has inspired a lot of my work, and it inspires. Of course, it can inspire work. It's a difference between inspiring work and using it to hype your work.
Yes.
Because you can see things like a suitcase following somebody, and you can think, "Oh, I'd like to make one of those." So use it for inspiration by all means. But the thing is that people forget. They say, "Well, that's science fiction." The main word for me is the word fiction.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's. I don't have to believe in Santa Claus to like a Christmas story. I don't have to believe in fairies to like Harry Potter. I don't have to believe in magic. So the trouble is that there's a melding of this, and I don't know whose fault it is. I've tried to work it out. I'm not blaming journalists. You'll hear roboticists, and you might even hear roboticists in this video talking about how the press wronged them. The press can wrong you, but what I do is, and I would advise anybody to do this, when you read a story in the paper talking about mother robots, nursing baby robots and things, go to the website where the press release came from and look at the press release that the scientists have signed off. I mean, I've been guilty of this in my past, to be honest. I mean, I'm being a bit hypocritical, but I'm prepared to admit it. So science fiction, great for inspiration, but let's leave it as science fiction. And the thing about journalists is you're in a real hurry to get a story out. And you're looking for a narrative angle. And there's a whole load of preset narratives there in science fiction. Right? Yeah, exactly. So you can grab, talk to me about autonomous weapon systems, Terminator. It's it's actually, they might become quite pricey trying to find articles about autonomous weapon systems that don't have a picture of the Terminator. Yes. That's rare. Yeah. I wrote a feature for the Daily Telegraph. I did a really, really balanced one, made sure there was no sci-fi angle to it whatsoever. And when you write for newspapers, any journalist, you don't ever get to choose the headline. Right. That's done by sub-editors always. So I write this very, very carefully, and they call it March of the Killer Robots, and it's got all these Terminators with machine guns, But if you read the article, but most people don't. They read the headline, look at the picture, and then make comments. So it's kind of it's a hard job. And I think that another good thing to do for anybody who's listening is, and people are starting to do this, is training journalists. So I work for an organisation sometimes called Uniquely. That's a UN organisation, and they hire me on journalist training courses in AI, just to tell them what they. Well, it's not any good to tell them. What we've all got to work at now, and we should all get together and do this, is to think up a bunch of narrative templates. Yes. Alternative good narrative templates that are catchy. And if we do that, then the journalists have something else to plug into.
Well, it's something to both plug into but push against as well, to show the distinction.
That's right.
I mean, for example, with the light-seeking robot out in the parking lot,
yes, that's right.
Immediately it's quite easy to throw on anthropomorphic
completely, yes, completely.
Or even just animalistic, and we've been doing that as humans for the evolution of our language. Right. I mean, it comes back to the signifiers that you were just.
We've been doing that since ancient Greece with puppets since then. Yes. Yes. I did write a book on another thing I did. I wrote 85,000 words of a book. It took me 4 years of solid research on the ancient automata, starting from 400 BC, going through Greece, China, through the whole Muslim world, and right up to the 19th century. And I get trapped by all of this ethics stuff, and it's still sitting there. And my daughter, who's a copy editor and copywriter, has just taken it off me and says, I will write the thing. So that might happen. But that was interesting in itself as well when you look at anthropomorphism. Yes. Because in 60 AD, when Heron of Alexandria made his first programmable robot, and they've got a paper called I Wrote Bot in New Scientist, so if you don't believe that, you can look up and it tells you how to program it with ropes. But when he made it, he said, make it small enough so that people don't know that there's nobody inside it, because that was a typical technique, but big enough to strike awe into people. And the idea there was, this was engineers who didn't want to talk about engineering. It was natural magic. They wanted to make people think that it was magical, and they wanted them to be anthropomorphic. And that's been going on all the way through the building of automata and everything else up till now. And it hasn't been harmful up till now. So, but it is now. unless you're careful. Now, there's some people who will say, some people are being a bit extreme, saying any anthropomorphic, any humanoid representation of a robot is deception and should not be allowed. So like any humanoid, and particularly Hanson Robotics Sophie robot, which notoriously got Saudi citizenship. Although David Hanson didn't know about that, and it's only honorary citizenship, but even so. Now, I don't believe that there's any harm in it. I like show robots. I've liked them all the way through. There was a great Electra in the 1939, which really inspired a whole generation of engineers, really did, in the United States. And so it's not a bad thing. But where it becomes bad is if it really, good for entertainment, but if you start misleading people and confusing the developments in a topic like AI. There's a guy called Ben Goetzel who works with David Hanson, and he's doing really bad things, I think. He's confusing a lot. He's confusing David Hanson himself. I have a good relationship with David, and he talks about all these cognitive architectures, and he's got all this, the robot's thinking, it's almost human, but you just have to watch 10 interviews and you see this, it's answering the same questions, and everybody's been given a scripted list of questions to ask, and you see people in news programs saying, I don't know where these questions came from, but I'll ask them. And I've challenged them to actually let me interview it in public, but I'm not getting any response. So why this is bad is because Sophie it appeared at the United Nations, and that's when they were talking about artificial intelligence and the development of artificial intelligence, giving scripted question and answer sessions, making all these political people, all these delegations who are non-technical, actually believe that AI is much more advanced than it was.
Performance.
Yes, but then it got worse because our campaign coordinator for this event was at a major security conference with all the foreign ministers around the world in Munich, and she was on a panel introduced by Sophie. So this is now getting to the point where this is now something that's getting up my nose. I really don't like it for that reason. So have nice show robots, do all that kind of stuff, and it's great fun, but don't do that. I'm not really sure how much it's really changing as yet. I mean, computers have certainly changed. And let me just say why that is. I mean, I keep falling on and off the fence. I never fall on the other side of the fence, but I keep getting on the fence about how many jobs are going to be lost, because there's big stories going on all the time about robotics and artificial intelligence going to take everybody's jobs, and they might do. But I'm someone, as I said earlier, I don't like speculation. I don't like people talking about singularity and AI will take over the planet and those things. And I have to apply that to myself in the future of jobs as well, because it's essentially speculation. And things like, I was really concerned at the beginning, things like trucks, autonomous trucks, right, going to come everywhere. And then you start to realise, hang on, these things are not going anywhere very quickly. This is not happening very quickly at all. This is all hype. This is sort of nonsense, really. And I think it was progressing quite well with people like Google being careful. And then Elon Musk comes along and starts killing people, and Uber. And not many people, but even so. So that part of work. But I think one of the things that will go is it's jobs in the service industry. You know, typical jobs that students would take, or people who are not really, I don't like the word low skilled at all, but it's people who have less time for education. And I say less time for education because, you know, people talk about, it's low skilled jobs, and uneducated people's jobs will go in burger bars. For instance, there's a new burger bar in San Francisco where there's a robot arm that can make burgers. I think it's something like 400 an hour from fresh meat. And I know the former CEO of McDonald's said if the McDonald's workers keep complaining, they will be replaced by these machines. And I've no doubt that they will be replaced by the machines. But the robots aren't so good at cleaning around the taps or taking orders or getting stuff. I mean, there's still going to be jobs there for a while anyway. You know, they'll take swathes of those jobs, making pizzas, automating essentially. So I'm I was very concerned about that, but not as concerned as I was. So I jumped back up on the fence again, and I'm being agnostic now and looking around. I think there will be a reduction in jobs, and it's just a matter of thinking about how big will that reduction be. So the places that I see a lot of action are in law. So there's a lot of AI programs in law coming up, accounting as well, those kinds of things. But what I'm very uncomfortable, and I think we're going to stop it, is having jobs taken in policing. So predictive policing, for instance. I mean, no matter how much, there's big companies doing this, like Compass in the United States, and they're selling this stuff like like crazy. And whenever the other people come along, NGOs come along, non-governmental organisations, and show the sort of bias that's coming out, it's quite clearly race bias in terms of, you look at risk of committing a crime after being in bail, those sorts of things. When you look at all those, what they do is they go back to the company and get the company to test it. And the company come out and say, oh, it's fine. They produce big manuals. But I think that might be wound back. I hope so. So the jobs I really don't want to see going is, my view, and I'm going to push this as hard as I can for the rest of my life, really, if I need to, is that anything that significantly impacts, any decision that significantly impacts on a human life should be made by a human. Well, I'm not very keen on going down the dignity route. Yeah. I've had a lot of trouble with that. I don't really know what dignity is. I know it when I see it. I was a psychiatric nurse in my youth, and my first day on the ward, an old man came up to me, and he was covered with shit, essentially, to be crude about it, and lots of snot coming down, and his pants were full of this, and he was walking around going, nurse, nurse, nurse. That was definitely completely undignified. And I can understand that. But when people talk about dignity a lot and you press them, there's so many different views of what it is. And I feel that I know what it is, but I can't argue it academically. I'm not a moral philosopher. And I know moral philosophers, and I say to them, could you help me with this? And after I talk to them for half an hour, I realise that it's not a help at all. And it's the first principle of the German Constitution as well. So they go for dignity in a big way. And you can see it in the extremes, like when people talk about it's undignified to be killed by autonomous weapons. Yes, but it's also undignified. Warfare itself is undignified, so there's so many things like that. But I like to think about it more when I'm thinking about the workforce. I like to think about it. I'm from a very working class family. They were all tradespeople. And the meaning of their lives was bringing food home for their families. Their job was the meaning of their life, and it was their dignity as well, if you want, but it gave them meaning to their lives. And if they were all unemployed, as happened in the Depression, people get really depressed. I mean, to call it the Depression, but people get really miserable because of that. And so you worry about that. And if you talk about stripping away people's meaning, and it would be their dignity as well, if you like, taking orders from a machine, that's where I would start to worry. So you're in the workforce, and an AI system, the people keep comparing AI systems with humans. The big thing is, well, an AI system won't make so many errors, it won't be. I don't care. I mean, an AI system will write better literature. I doubt very much that, but it will make great art painting. I don't care. I don't want to read it. I want to read stuff with has meaning in my culture and my life. I don't care what AI can do. It's to me, comparing a human with an AI system is a category error. Why do we want to reduce our meaning? Why do we want to reduce our dignity? What's the goal here? Is it productivity? Why do we want productivity? Want productivity so we have better lives, so the economy's better. But what if it's not a better life for millions of people who are having to be subjected to machines telling them what to do? It makes no sense to me. And all the time I've fallen for the same line, which is I write about this and say, well, we have to handle this carefully because we don't want to stifle innovation. And then I started thinking, well, some innovations are worth stifling. And I'm not a technophobe, and I embrace technology. I use it a lot, and I think it could be of great benefits to mankind, or or whatever, humanity. But we have to get it right. And I don't see why we should go down a route that's going to harm people, whether big companies want it or not. And I think we have the ability to say no. And people can and will. You just boycott all the products that are not handmade. I mean, crafts are very popular. I mean, I said something in Britain recently. I did a news interview because Prince Charles, our royal prince, and I'm an anti-royalist, by the way, so, you know, I found myself defending the prince, much to everybody's shock, because he said he thought we were taking meaning away from human life and going far too far. He said, why are we trying to become machines? Mm-hmm. And I actually found myself agreeing with it. He said a lot of silly things as well. But I get quite a lot of attack on Twitter from AI people saying, what are you doing supporting the prince? You know. But it is important, isn't it? Our life, that's what you have to ask yourself all the time. Is this going to benefit us? Yes, there's quite a few examples. I mean, let's take robotics. It's not really robotics, but a sensor example. There's now a soap dispenser that's discovered. You might have seen that. There's a really good YouTube video. Anybody looks up racist soap dispenser in a restroom, a gentleman's restroom, and you see a white guy going in, putting his hand under and getting soap and washing his hands, and his friend, who's of much darker shade of skin, puts his hand, can't get anything out at all. The white guy puts his hand under, no, nothing there. So he puts a towel there, gets soap and can wash his hands. And then after that, somebody at a Marriott hotel had a video, the same thing happening at their own sink in a Marriott hotel. And that's got a lot to do, so that's a really bad example. And just to finish that example, that's got a lot to do with the lack of diversity in the workplace. If you had a lot of more African Americans in that workplace, that would never have happened. It would have been, you know, they don't even test for that. And you look at so much going on in technology. You've got 20% of the workforce in Silicon Valley is feminine, is female. So it's a very small percentage, and these things really matter, because even if you look at face recognition algorithms, let's look at that's a decision as well. Okay, so let's use that as an example. So face recognition algorithms. Now, in the UK, our police spent 20 million, 40 million pounds, which is like $50 million, something like that, on face recognition technology. Very high tech. And they've been running it with crowds, finding criminals in crowds, matching it against a criminals database, going into crowds and picking people out. So an NGO called Big Brother Watch used our freedom of information to get data on these crowd experiments. The best the police did, was 91% inaccuracy.
Wow.
The worst was 98%. It was an average of 95%, right? The worst was 98% because it was an Afro-Caribbean festival in London, and they're pulling people out. They're putting their hands up their bottoms. They're searching and they're stripping them down. So there's really bad decisions being made. Same thing is happening in the US. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, took a database of Congress, members of Congress, the whole of Congress, and 150,000 pictures of criminals. 28 members of Congress turned out to be criminals. Now, they might well be criminals, as you might say, but it's they've matched them with these particular criminals. Now, again, it was the Latin American ones, the Afro-Caribbean ones, and the subsequent experiments show that 98. All this stuff about face recognition is so amazing. You do get about 98% accuracy with white males who haven't got beards. When you get women, it often misclassifies a woman as a man, and other mistakes. And the darker the shade of skin, it's quite clear the less accurate they are, whether that's a property of it or whether it's because there's not enough people. But let me give you another example, though, of this bias, or just a mistaken idea. There's a lot of companies now using, there's one in particular called HireView, using these algorithms to decide on job. And there's algorithms that go through your CV, but they've found out that you write in big white letters Oxford, Cambridge, and Mail and things like that, and you're going to get, humans can't say it, but the machines can. So, but HireView, what they do is they sell it now to Leverhulme, which is one of our biggest employers, massive employer, and you get all your interviews on a mobile phone. So you stare at the mobile phone and it takes 25,000 data points from your face in answer to questions. So it's not the answer to the question in this interview, it's your reaction. And you can see, just how you look, or when you look a bit, whatever. And then they have their best employees and they've asked them the same questions, and now they match them, and the higher the match, the higher your score. Now, if you have all white male executives, which is most likely, and it's not a meritocracy. This is the problem with using technology generally, both in this circumstance and other circumstances, is that we're an evolving society. Our values, our norms are evolving, not quick enough, but we're seeing, I've been around since 1948, and I've seen incredible evolution of our values towards men, towards women, towards gay people, just gender stuff generally, towards race. It's getting better and better and better. But all of those old values are locked, ossified in the internet in terms of the data we're using. And that's where the real problem lies. Because we're using machine learning, which ends up producing very non-transparent programs that you can't even look and see, was it the little squiggly hair sticking out of his ear, out of certain people's ears that got that classification. It's very, very bad. And in terms of this higher view thing, who are these best employees? As I say, they're probably white males, but supposing their best employees happen just by chance to have bad twitches, so they always went like that. That means their whole workforce would have to have twitches. That's just showing you how ridiculous it is. Yes, and we're not. I've got hundreds of examples, but we're not seeing an end to this. It's just growing and growing and growing. Now, one of the problems is that any fool can download a machine learning tool off the internet. You don't have to be greatly technical. You're a little bit technical to use it. And then you put a load of data into it and you make a program. Now, it's up to your high quality marketing team to sell that. There's no regulation whatsoever. There's no test. And I think with things that impact on people's lives like that, you either have a human properly in control of the decision, which I'd much prefer, and that's complicated, or you have something like drug trials. Now, people say, so very, very long term, you don't just suddenly give people medical drugs. So you could have clinical trials. And the problem with that is it cuts back on startups. So how does a startup manage that? And that's a problem. But some sacrifices have to be made, really, and that's a sacrifice that has to be made. But maybe we'll find a solution for this in some way. But having people make decisions is very difficult, because people have automation biases of various kinds. And that's why you need engineers involved in this kind of thing. So something keeps giving you the right answer, like your spam filter, and sure enough, you stop thinking. So you have to start, and that's why when I said earlier about ethics coming in and responsibility coming into the design, if you're building a decision system and you want people to make the decision, you have to, at the very base level, you have to at that point make sure that they're actually being engaged, so they can't just make a one-off decision. You have to do tricks. I'm not a designer, so I don't know the tricks, but you're going to have to do tricks to make them think. Giving them false examples to test them every so often, for instance.
Yeah, I like this idea, and that's why I'd actually really like to close the interview is we started with your work on communicating with publics, but communicating with publics in quite disciplined fashion.
Yes.
Where you acknowledge the narrative and the imaginative inspirations for many of these works through things like science fiction, an emphasis on precise language that opens up both the possibilities, the particular function, but also the limitations of specific systems. And we've started to discuss a little bit on this concept of responsibility and decision making. I'm wondering if you can help us finish out this conversation in thinking about the ways in which your present work is putting pressure on multiple factions in various levels of power to really come to a reckoning on this concept of responsibility. Perhaps some of the work that you're doing with the UN, but also the work that you have done as an educator.
Well, essentially, I just get on a soapbox and preach to anybody that will listen. I mean, that's my main method. I don't have, well, I just do it. And I feel very, very passionate about the objects. And I've got 5 daughters and 7 grandchildren. And the grandchildren, you have to think about the world that they're coming to live in. Mm-hmm. And the older I get, the more responsible I feel. And one thing I like to do, though, is to bring on as many young people. And for young people, for me, can be 40. I mean, I'm old enough to can say, so I can bring on 35-year-olds and things like the co-director of my organisation. I'm quite happy to help people like that and push them forward. And that's one way of doing it. The other way is, I can't explain to people how to do it. I'm very fortunate because I had some early popular media experience, that the media know me and I deliver the goods, and so I'm part of it. A little bit about civil rights and organization.
Oh yeah, civil rights as well.
Oh yeah, of course, yes. But the thing is that I can deliver the goods, and so I'm part of the conversation. So I get called upon to give the government a bad time, and I have to say, just as in passing, that 20 years ago, people would call me, media would call me and say, oh, wonder about your opinion about AI something, and I would talk to them about the hype in AI, and they'd say thank you very much and hang up. The media weren't interested at all. But now they're looking, this is a change there's been, they're looking for conflict, they're looking for an angle against the technology, which is good. So the way to do it, the way I've done it mainly is to set up or help to co-found organisations, well, the 2 main organisations, and then rely on the expertise of others as well. So the thing is to show a bit of leadership, get people together and push them forward. So the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, we started in 2009. After I'd looked at the military stuff and was going around talking, and I found a couple of philosophers and a physicist, 2 philosophers, one from America, one from Australia, one from Germany, and myself, and we set up in this very room that you're in now, filming me, in 2009, and we talked and said, well, let's do something, and we called it the International Committee of Robot Arms Control, and we got funding to run a big conference in Berlin in 2010. We accumulated more members then. We got lawyers involved as well, and roboticists, a wide range of people, skills. But for instance, we were just out talking a lot. When you talk about how do you put pressure on, so our mission was to get nations to discuss this together, get international discussion going. Academic, what else do I know? Oh, try and get them all together. And I was travelling around the world talking to policymakers and militaries and things. They were all listening and good discussions, but they weren't talking to each other, and I didn't know how to do that. In 2012, a Human Rights Watch came to visit me in Sheffield and talked to me and said we were getting interested in this, and I talked to them for about 4 or 5 hours, and then they invited me to talk in Norway at the cluster munitions celebrations, the banning of, not the use of. And then they took me to New York to discuss, to give a talk to all the landmine NGOs who'd successfully got landmines banned. And at that point, we had 2 Nobel laureates and Amnesty, not Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch and Pugwash, so a number of big powerful NGOs together, and formed the campaign to stop killer robots. And then my organisation, ICRAC, became an NGO. We signed up and became an NGO so that we could join in. And I didn't, otherwise they wanted me as an advisor, but then I wanted my whole organisation involved. I thought you would need scientists in there, to help. And so, but that changed everything, and I learnt about influence then. Immediately we were knocking on delegations at the UN doors, and within 3 months of launching, we had a mandate at the UN to set up a whole week of discussions at a committee called the CCW, which specialises in the prohibition of weapons. And then I've had to learn about advocacy, and it's been very difficult for us. And so we get new members, and I always try, when new members come to the UN, I always get them to make the statements. I make some major statements still, but I get them to make our first deliberation, our main statement, because then they find that they're much more engaged. And for academics, doing advocacy is a difficult thing. Very difficult. I'm used to getting into big arguments, getting into semantic discussions and no, it's not that, and you know how academics are, we debate. I mean, I don't go all twisty face when I'm debating really, but we get into real debates. Whereas you learn that what I've learned is, think about, what is my objective here? Is it to create change? Never mind what my academic views are. Never mind what my little piece of research is important to me to show that I'm distinctive. And in academia, you need that. When you go for a job interview, especially as a new faculty, they want to know what's the little thing that you've contributed, not what your PhD advisors contributed. It's the opposite in campaigning. We work as a collective. And if I disagree with somebody, which I do sometimes, zip, I don't argue with them, and then we go and meet ambassadors who've got a completely different opinion. They're trying to push the weapon. Again, you agree with them on some things and you try and push them a little bit and direct them. So it's about negotiation, and that is, I have to confess, it was very hard. I mean, it's taken me probably 4 years, 5 years to be able to adapt to that, and I still can slip into being an academic sometimes. It's hard after many, many years of training. It'd be really good if we could take in academics and train them in this, and train them also. I mean, I have roots now, for instance, in our parliament and other parliaments. So I go and talk at Helsinki Parliament, I talk at the Dutch Parliament, and it's a matter of how do you do that? You get to know the gatekeepers and you write to them, and I write to other NGOs, and they will write to me and say, look, they're about to make a big decision in our parliament, and they will set up meetings outside the parliament, and then the parliament might ask me to come and address them. So it's a matter of, it would also be very good for academics to learn how to lobby, how to go to the White House and point out a problem. If you get... They're very good at writing open letters, and those have been very supportive. We've had thousands upon thousands of academics write open letters to the UN, which have been very helpful. And also what you have to remember is, and I've seen many academics, because they had these panels for years at the UN. For 3 years they had nothing but academic panels. And I was getting really angry with the UN people and telling them off and saying, look, we're getting an arms race here of academics who want to say, this is my little bit, which was only a slight shift from somebody else's. And people were coming and talking about 100 levels of autonomy and 20 levels of autonomy and things. It was all completely irrelevant. Yeah. And we were trying to drag it back to one thing, is we're only interested in autonomy in the critical functions of selecting targets and killing people. We don't care what else you do, but just concentrate on that. But of course the US and a number of other nations couldn't understand what autonomy was, and they needed help. Pakistan and low-tech nations, Cuba, they could understand fully, but somehow big nations like Russia and the United States and Israel couldn't understand it. That's called putting the brakes on, slowing things down. But to learn that, to learn those skills is so useful, and to not just write open letters, but to actually learn lobbying skills. I think it would be very good in the modern world if engineers would spend a whole year in humanities. I think learning about international relations, it's bound to affect their work, and it could be good for them as well in terms of learning how to market products. So I'm not just saying they should all be good people and do all sorts of things, but it could be very good to learn how to do these things. And I think the world would be quite different if we did train our engineers like this, because at the moment, as anybody engineers watching this, they will all have done a course on engineering ethics. I don't know what other courses they're doing and who's listening to this, but everybody does a course in engineering ethics. And I mean, I've been working kind of not against it, because you need engineering ethics, but to get that adopted for a number of years, talking to our Royal Academy of Engineering, because it has nothing to do with social responsibility. It's got to do with your duty to your client. And if your client wants a bigger gun to kill more people, you make a bigger gun. It's all about getting the specifications right in computer science. And I would like to see, and the IEEE are trying at the moment to do this with their Global Ethics Initiative, and I don't know what sort of job they're doing, but they're the first people to really stick out and try, at least. And we need to change the whole mode of what's trained in ethics. Now, I work with the Royal Academy of Engineering, and we set up seminars. And their aim was, we're going to get all these thorny old engineers who are really into the rules and looking after the client, and we're going to re-educate them. And we had great seminars, but not one of those engineers showed up. We got all these young engineers who were all keen on this in the first place. And so I don't know what to do. We just have to make it targets for funding or something.
I think that's right, and you work with who comes through the door first.
Yeah.
That's your grassroots effort.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Is there anything that you'd like to say in closing? In regards to
I could say things for 2 or 3 days, but I won't. I'll just to encourage people that it was upon a time. There was a time in my own career when I started getting into ethical issues and issues of responsibility and those things, and I warned young faculty off it, because the key thing was to get publications in good journals if you want to succeed. And if you did public engagement work, or you did any kind of societal impact work, you were down the tubes. And you could do a little bit. I encouraged them to do a little bit. There was a little bit of funding around for it, and do some to keep up. But the world has changed now. There's a great need for this. And so I'd recommend any faculty, just do a little bit. Just maybe go out and talk to a classroom, and you'll find that you start getting more engaged with the public. I mean, as you get more engaged with the public, and this is what happened to me, you start feeling responsibility. You're taking taxpayers' money, or you're taking money for your job. And part of that job should be your social responsibility if you're an academic, I think. And I think it's no longer an option. I think everybody should get into it. Some of us are better at it than others, but at least those who are not good at it could at least encourage those who are. Maybe take up a bit of slack in their teaching so that they can go out and do a bit more public work. Just work together a bit more.